The door of Fenwick Grange had never made such a sound before. Iron and oak and finality all at once, and the storm swallowed it whole before its echo could reach her. Rosamond Brearley stood upon the frozen step in nothing but her thin muslin evening gown, one satin slipper already lost to a drift of blue-black snow, and for the length of a single ragged breath, she could not make herself believe that it had truly happened. The cold came for her the way a debt comes for a ruined man, without mercy and without hurry, certain of its claim. She turned back to the door and pressed her bare palm against it, and beneath her hand she felt the house go on, living without her. The muffled warmth of the fires, the clink of glass, her father's voice rising once more in that terrible flat register he used when a thing was already decided. The knocker was inches from her fingers. She did not lift it. Some fierce and foolish part of her, the same part that had refused Sir Miles Crail an hour ago in the drawing room with her chin level and her voice steady, would not let her beg at the door of a man who had thrown his own daughter out into a blizzard rather than lose a fortune. An hour ago, she had been Miss Brearley of Fenwick Grange, seated by candlelight with her mother's garnet ring warm on her finger, listening to her father explain, as though he were discussing the price of wheat, that she would marry Sir Miles by Candlemas, or she would be no daughter of his. An hour ago, she had believed there was a floor beneath her that could not give way. Now the wind found the gap between her shoulder blades and poured down the length of her spine, and she understood that she had been wrong about a great many things, and that the ring on her finger was the only warm thing left in the whole white world. She began to walk because to stand still was to die, and she was not, whatever else this night made of her, ready to give her father the satisfaction of a body on his step come morning. The drive was gone, erased, the lime trees that lined it reduced to grey shrouds that loomed and vanished. She held her skirts against the wind that wanted to tear them from her and put one numb foot in front of the other, down toward the lane, toward the village of Malcolm, 3 miles distant, though she knew even as she counted the distance that 3 miles in this was a number that meant nothing, that might as well have been 300, and she did not let herself finish the thought. The snow was no longer falling so much as being flung sideways in fistfuls, and it stung her cheeks and gummed her lashes and worked its way into the seams of her bodice until the shivering that had begun as a tremor became a great convulsive shaking she could not command. Her feet had stopped hurting, which some distant part of her knew was a worse sign than the pain had been. She thought of her mother, dead these 6 years, who had fastened this very ring on her finger with fever-thin hands and told her to be brave and to be good, and never once mentioned that the two might one day pull in opposite directions. Rosamond fell for the first time at the bottom of the drive, went down onto her knees in the drift, and it was so much softer there, so much quieter, that for one seductive moment she wanted only to stay. She did not know how long she wandered after that, whether it was an hour or a quarter of one. Time had come loose from its moorings. She knew only that the hedgerow she had been following her hand along was suddenly not there, that she had strayed off the lane and into open ground, and that the cold had stopped feeling like cold and started feeling treacherously like warmth, like a heavy blanket being drawn up to her chin. She thought she saw a light. She told herself it was a lie the eye tells the dying, and she followed it anyway because to follow a lie was still to move. And then her knees struck something hard beneath the snow, a low stone wall, and beyond it a great dark shape reared against the paler dark of the sky, and she fell across the wall with the last of what she had and did not get up. The Duke of Ravenscar was not in the habit of walking his own grounds at midnight, and he was less in the habit of doing so in a storm that had already killed 2 of his sheep and half buried the eastern lodge. But he had not slept a full night in 3 winters, not since the winter that had taken everything from him. And on the anniversaries of that loss, he found the walls of Ravenscar Hall pressed too close, and he went out into the weather, because the weather, at least, did not pretend to be sorry for him. His lantern threw a small ragged circle of gold across the snow. It was within that circle, at the foot of the old ha-ha wall, that he saw a shape that ought to have been a fallen branch or a drift, and was, when he lifted the light, a woman. She did not remember being carried. She remembered only, in broken pieces she would later try and fail to arrange in order, the wrongness of being suddenly warm, of hard arms beneath her knees and her shoulders, of a voice that was low and rough and used to being obeyed, saying words she could not pass, close to her ear. She remembered a jolting darkness, and then light, too much of it, and heat that hurt worse than the cold had, a great blaze of it against her face, and the same voice speaking sharply to someone else, and hands, many hands now, working at the frozen laces of her bodice, chafing her wrists, and she tried to say her name, to give an account of herself the way a lady must, and could produce nothing but a sound that shamed her. And then even that was gone. When Rosamond woke, it was to firelight on a high plastered ceiling she had never seen, and to a pain in her hands and feet so bright and so total that she cried out before she was fully awake. And a woman's face appeared above her, broad and kind and creased with worry, a housekeeper's face, saying, "Hush now, hush, you're safe. You're at the hall. The master found you in the snow." The hall. There was only one hall for miles, that a woman said in that tone, with that mixture of pride and dread. She was at Ravenscar. She had been carried out of the storm and into the house of the Duke of Ravenscar, a man she had never met, and whom all of Malcolm spoke of in lowered voices. The widowed Duke, the cold Duke, the one who had shut up half his house and turned away every hostess in 3 counties, and buried his young wife and his unborn child in the same frozen ground on the same grey day, and had not been seen to smile since. How long? Rosamond managed, and the housekeeper, who gave her name as Mrs. Peel, told her it was the 2nd morning, that she had burned with fever through a day and a night, that they had feared for 2 of her toes and then feared less, that the master had sent to Malcolm for the surgeon through snow, no sane man would ride in, and paid him what he asked and more. Rosamond lay very still and let this settle over her. 2 days. Her father would have been asked by now where his daughter had gone. She wondered what he had answered. She wondered whether he had answered at all, or whether he had simply let the household believe she had eloped, which would suit his purposes and cost him nothing. And the thought of it opened a hollow beneath her ribs that had nothing to do with the fever. She did not meet the Duke that day, nor speak to him. But that evening, drifting in and out of a thin sleep, she became aware that the door of the chamber had opened without a sound, and that a man stood just within it, tall and unspeaking, a dark column against the light of the corridor. He did not come to the bed. He stood at the distance propriety demanded, and rather more, and she kept her breathing slow and even, and watched him through her lashes, and she saw him look at her for a long moment, with an expression she could not read, something that was not tenderness and was not indifference, but stood in the cold country between the two. And then he said, so quietly she was not sure the words were meant for her at all, "You were very nearly not found." And then he was gone, and the door closed on its silent hinges, and Rosamond lay awake a long while after, her fever-warm hand curled around her mother's ring, wondering why a man reputed to have no heart left had ridden out at midnight into a killing storm and found her and stayed. She was 3 more days abed before Mrs. Peel would allow her downstairs, and by then the snow had done what the master's whole household could not. It had shut the world entirely away. The drifts stood higher than a man against the north front. The lane to Malcolm was gone. The lane to anywhere was gone. No carriage would come, and none would leave until a thaw that the old men below stairs, sucking their teeth, put a week off at the soonest, and a fortnight at the worst. Rosamond understood, standing at the window of the small warm parlour they had given her, wrapped in a borrowed shawl that smelled of cedar and some other woman's lavender water, that she was a guest who could not be got rid of, in the house of a man who wanted no guests, and that whatever this was, it was not going to end quickly. Behind her, unheard, the Duke of Ravenscar stood in the doorway and watched her look at the snow, and neither of them yet knew that the storm which had nearly killed her was the kindest thing that had happened to either of them in years. Their first true conversation was a battle, and she won it, and she suspected afterward that he had let her, though she could never be sure. He had come to the small parlour to inform her, with the clipped courtesy of a man reading terms, that a groom would carry word of her whereabouts to her father the instant the roads allowed, so that Mr. Brearley might send a carriage for his daughter. Rosamond set down her tea with a hand that did not quite tremble, and told him, in a voice she kept level by main force, that her father would send no carriage, that her father had put her out of doors himself, that there was no home at Fenwick Grange to which she might be returned. The Duke went very still. She watched the words land on him and saw, for just an instant before he mastered it, something flare in his face that was not pity, that was closer to a cold and personal anger, as though her father's cruelty were a debt he had a mind to collect. "Then he is a fool," the Duke said at last, low and worse. And he did not send for the carriage, and neither of them spoke again of Fenwick Grange for many days. So began the strange snowbound season of Rosamond Brearley at Ravenscar Hall, a season out of time, sealed off from the world by walls of white, in which the rules that governed a lady's conduct in a duke's house grew slack and then grew tender, because there was no one to keep them and nowhere to keep them for. In the mornings she took her breakfast alone, and read her way along a library the like of which she had never seen, ladders and galleries and 10,000 spines gone soft with dust, because half the great house was shut and shrouded, and no one had touched these rooms in years. In the afternoons, if the wind dropped, she walked the one cleared path the gardeners kept open in the walled kitchen garden, between beds of frozen rosemary and the black stumps of the roses, and it was there, on the 4th or 5th afternoon, that she found the Duke of Ravenscar on his knees in the snow before a small stone that she took at first for a sundial, and understood, too late to look away, was a grave. He did not hear her, or he pretended he did not, and she did the only kind thing there was to do, which was to retreat without a word, and let him keep the one grief he had not chosen to show her. But that night at dinner, the first they had taken together, the long table set with only 2 places at its near end and 40 feet of dark polished oak stretching away into the cold like a road to nowhere, he looked up from his untouched plate and said, without preamble, in the flat voice of a man reciting a thing he has told himself 1,000 times, "My wife is buried in the kitchen garden. She asked it of me. She said she did not want to lie in the family vault among strangers, that she wanted to lie where things grew." He turned his glass slowly by its stem and did not drink. "Our son is buried with her," He lived 4 hours. And then he looked at Rosamond directly, the firelight catching the hard planes of a face that might have been carved for a tomb itself, and he said, "I have not told anyone that in 3 years. I do not know why I have told you." And Rosamond, who had learned in 6 days that this man's silences were made of iron and his few words of something more precious, said only softly, "Because I asked you nothing," and watched his throat move, and neither of them finished what was on their plates. The snow held, and the days folded one into another, and Rosamond learned the shape of him the way one learns a house in the dark, by touch and by the sounds it made. She learned that he rose before the servants and split kindling in the cold with his own hands, a duke doing a scullery boy's work, because his body needed spending or it would turn on him. She learned that he could not abide music, that the sight of the pianoforte in the shrouded drawing room made a muscle jump in his jaw, and she guessed without asking that his wife had played. She learned that beneath the granite there ran a vein of dry wit he had forgotten he possessed, that surfaced by accident and startled him each time, as though laughter were a language he had once spoken fluently in some other life. And he learned her too, though he did it in his silent way, learned that she took her tea too strong and read at meals when she thought no one minded and hummed under her breath when she was frightened, and did it now, softly, when the wind rose at night, and one evening she came down to find that the pianoforte in the drawing room had been uncovered, its cloth folded neatly upon a chair, and she understood the enormity of what he had done and said nothing, and sat and played very quietly, and from the far side of the room she heard him let out a breath that sounded as though he had been holding it for 3 years. There came a night deep in the 2nd week, when the storm returned in force, and the great house groaned around them like a ship, and Rosamond could not sleep, and went down in her borrowed shawl to the library, where the fire was always kept, and found him there before her. He stood at the tall black window with a glass in his hand, and did not turn, and she should have withdrawn and did not, and the not withdrawing was itself a kind of confession neither of them named. They talked that night in the low, careless way of 2 people whom the dark and the storm have made temporarily equal, of things they had told no one. She told him of her mother's death, of the ring, of the 6 long years of keeping her father's house and enduring his tempers, and telling herself that duty was the same as love because she could not afford to learn otherwise. He told her, haltingly, of the accident, the carriage, the winter road, the choice a physician had put to him at the last, the mother or the child, and how there had in the end been no choice to make, and he had lost them both, and how he had come to believe that some men are made to bury what they love, that he was such a man, and that he had shut up his heart along with his house, because a heart, like a house, is only so much stone if no one lives in it. And Rosamond crossed the space between them, which was a thing no lady must ever do, and she did not touch him, but she stood close enough that he could feel the warmth of her, and she said, "You rode out into the storm and you found me. A man who has shut up his heart does not do that." And he looked down at her, and the distance between his hand and hers on the cold windowsill was less than an inch, and neither of them closed it, and it was, God help her, the most unbearable moment of her life, and the fire cracked and fell in on itself and broke the spell, and she fled to her room and lay shaking with something that was no longer cold at all. She began to be afraid, after that night, of the thing that was growing in the sealed white heart of the winter, because she knew what it was and knew it could not be. She was a ruined woman, a merchant-blooded girl thrown out by her own father, without dowry or name or the protection of a single living soul. He was the Duke of Ravenscar, whose grief was the property of 3 counties, who could no more marry a Brearley of nowhere than he could marry the housemaid. Whatever softened between them here in this room out of time would harden again the instant the roads opened and the world came flooding back with all its rules intact. She told herself this in the dark, sternly, the way her mother might have. She told herself she must not let her heart live in a house it would only be turned out of. And then, in the morning, he would look up from splitting kindling in the blue cold, his breath smoking, and see her at the window, and something in his ruined face would ease, just slightly, and she would put her hand flat against the icy glass as though she could reach him through it, and she would forget every sensible thing she had told herself in the dark. The thaw, when it broke the world open, broke it open all at once, and it did not come alone. She heard the carriage before she saw it, wheels grinding through the churned grey slush of the drive on the first afternoon, warm enough to melt the eaves, and her heart leapt up in a hope she was instantly ashamed of, because there was only one person who might be coming for her, and she found, standing frozen in the hall with Mrs. Peel, that she did not want to be come for at all. But it was not her father's shabby carriage that drew up before the north front. It was a gleaming equipage she knew too well, and the man who stepped down from it, brushing snowmelt from a coat, cut too young for him, settling his heavy jowls into a smile of proprietorial confidence, was Sir Miles Crail. He had come, he announced to the hall at large, before anyone had bid him enter, to collect his betrothed. The word struck Rosamond like a hand across the face. Betrothed. She began to say that she was no such thing, that she had refused him, but Sir Miles rode over her with the easy loudness of a man used to buying the last word, producing from his breast a folded paper. Waving it, a contract, he said. A contract of marriage signed and sealed by her father Walter Brearley in settlement of debts. Debts which Sir Miles now held, every farthing of them. The mortgage on the Grange, the notes, the lot. The girl was promised and paid for, and he had ridden through half a county of mud on the strength of a rumour that she had turned up at Ravenscar, and he would thank the Duke to hand her over so the wedding might proceed. And Rosamond, watching the paper shake in his soft hand, understood with a lurch of pure horror that the night her father had cast her out, he had not been disowning her at all. He had been delivering her. She had run into the blizzard to escape a marriage that her father had already sold, and only the mercy of the storm and a grieving man's midnight walk had kept her from being frozen goods handed over at the thaw. She turned to the Duke, and the Duke of Ravenscar had gone very quiet and very still in the way she had learned to dread, the granite stillness that came before he moved, and when he spoke his voice was soft as falling snow and colder. He asked to see the paper. Sir Miles, faltering now, some animal instinct warning him, surrendered it. The Duke read it once, unhurried, and Rosamond watched his eyes and saw that whatever it said, it was as bad as it could be, that in the eyes of the law, she was indeed a bought thing, that her refusal in a drawing room weighed nothing against her father's signature and Sir Miles's gold. The Duke folded the paper along its creases with terrible care, and he did not give it back, and he said, "The lady is under my protection and my roof. She will decide her own disposal, here now, before witnesses, and no signature of her father's binds her against her word." And Sir Miles' face went from red to a mottled purple, and he made the single greatest error of his life, which was to laugh and to say that her word, the word of a debtor's cast-off daughter, caught snowbound in a widower's house for a fortnight, was worth precisely nothing. and that whatever the Duke had made of her these 2 weeks, ruined was ruined, and he was still willing to take her, damaged goods and all, so his Grace need not trouble himself to play the gallant over He never finished the word. The Duke crossed the hall so fast that Rosamond did not see him move. Only its result, Sir Miles's cravat gathered in one gloved fist, the man hauled to his toes, and the Duke's voice at his ear, no longer soft. "You will apologise to Miss Brearley," he said, "and then you will get into your carriage, and you will carry a message to Walter Brearley, and the message is this, that his debts are mine now. I will buy every note you hold before you reach the county line, and I will hold them. And if either of you comes within a mile of this woman again, I will call them due to the last penny, and see you both in the Marshalsea to rot. Do you understand me?" It was not a question, and Sir Miles, whey-faced, choking on his own collar, understood him perfectly, and was gone within the quarter hour, his fine carriage flinging up slush, and Rosamond stood alone with the Duke in the great hall in the sudden ringing silence, and did not know whether she had just been rescued or ruined all over again, and the Duke would not look at her, and turned on his heel, and shut himself in the library, and did not come out. He did not come to dinner. She sat alone at the long table, with its 40 feet of dark oak, and could not eat, and the thing she had refused to feel all through the snowbound weeks came up in her at last, and would not be pressed down, because she understood now what he had done. He had made himself her creditor. He had bought her freedom with his own money and his own name, and then he had walked away from her without a word. And there was only one reason a man like that would rescue a woman and then refuse to look at her, and it was that he wanted her and believed with all his ruined heart that wanting her was one more thing he would be made to bury. She rose from the table. She did not summon a servant. She walked the cold length of the house to the library door, and she did not knock, because she had learned that his silences would keep her out forever if she let them, and she went in. He was at the window again, and he did not turn, and he said, before she could speak, in a voice scraped raw, that he had overstepped, that she was free now and owed him nothing, that he would settle a sum on her and see her established respectably in Bath or wherever she chose, that she need never see Ravenscar or its master again. And Rosamond crossed the room the way she had crossed it on the night of the storm, and this time she did not stop an inch away. She reached up with her bare hand, her mother's garnet ring catching the firelight, and she turned his face toward hers with her fingers along his jaw, the first time in 3 years, she would later learn, that anyone had touched him so, and she felt the shock of it go through him, and she said, "I do not want Bath. I do not want a settlement. I have spent 6 years being a duty to a man who did not love me, and I would rather freeze in the drift you found me in than spend one more day being a burden to a man who does. And you do. I have seen it. You uncovered the pianoforte. Do not tell me now that you feel nothing, Gideon, when I have felt it in you every day of this winter." His breath came apart. His hand came up and closed over hers where it lay against his face, gloveless skin on gloveless skin, and he shut his eyes as though the touch pained him, and he said, "I am afraid," and it was the bravest thing she had ever heard a man say. "I am afraid that if I let myself have you, the world will find a way to take you from me. It always has." And Rosamond said, "Then let it try. Let it try while I am yours, and not while I am nobody's. I have already been thrown into a blizzard and lived. There is nothing left in this world that frightens me but you not saying yes." And the Duke of Ravenscar, who had not wept in 3 years, bent his head against her shoulder, and did, and she held him in the firelight, while the last of the snow slid from the eaves, and when he lifted his face to hers at last, He was smiling, that forgotten language, and he kissed her, and neither of them heard the clock strike or cared that it had. It might have ended there, in the warm library with the thaw dripping outside, and been enough. But the world Rosamond had feared did come flooding back, and it came in the shape she least expected. A week into the thaw, with the banns not yet even called, a horseman was seen coming up the Malcolm Lane, riding badly, an older man on a hired hack, and Rosamond knew him from the top of the drive by the set of his shoulders before she could see his face, and her whole body went cold in the spring sun. It was her father. Walter Brearley had come to Ravenscar Hall. She would have had the doors barred. It was the Duke who would not. The Duke who had every reason to loose his contempt on the man, and instead said, quietly, watching her face, that she should decide, that no one crossed his threshold whom she did not wish to see, but that a thing left unsaid between a father and a child had a way of following the child indoors for the rest of her life, and that he of all men knew the weight of words one has left too long unspoken to the dead. So she received her father, because the Duke asked it, and because she found, to her own surprise, that she needed to. She received him in the very drawing room, where the pianoforte now stood uncovered, and she stood by it with her hand on its lid, and did not offer him a chair, and Walter Brearley, greyer than she remembered and smaller, turned his hat in his hands and could not meet her eye. He had come, he said, because Sir Miles's men had come to the Grange, and then the Duke's man of business had come after them and bought up every note he owed, and turned him out of nothing, had in fact left him the house, more than he deserved, and he had understood from this that his daughter was alive, that she was here, that she was to be a duchess, and that he had, on a night he would answer for at the judgment, put her out into a storm to be married off for money to a man he knew to be a brute. He had told himself that night that he was saving them both, the estate and the girl. He had told himself she would go quietly to Sir Miles's carriage in the morning and be a rich man's wife and thank him one day. He had not slept, he said, his voice breaking on the word, since the morning they found her slipper in the drift and not her, and believed for 2 days that he had killed his own child, his Margaret's child, the only thing his wife had left him, over money, over pride, over a debt that a stranger had wiped away with a stroke of the pen as though it had never mattered at all. He did not ask her forgiveness. He said he had not come for that he knew he had no right to it, that he had come only to see with his own eyes that she was living, and that he would go now and trouble her no more. And he turned to the door, and Rosamond stood at the pianoforte with her mother's ring on her hand, and every hard true thing she had a right to say rising up in her throat, and she thought of the small stone in the kitchen garden, and the man who had told her that he knew the weight of words left too long unsaid, and she found that she did not want to spend her new life the way her father had spent his, carrying an unhealed thing indoors and turning it over in the dark forever. She crossed the room. She took her father's cold hand in her 2 warm ones, the hand that had signed the paper, the hand that had never once in 6 years been offered to her in tenderness, and she felt him flinch as though he expected a blow. And she said, low, so that it was for the 2 of them alone, though the Duke stood in the doorway and heard it, I forgive you. She said it, and felt the truth of it settle into her as she spoke, the way warmth had settled into her frozen hands that first night, painful and total and real. I forgive you, Father, not because you have earned it, because I will not carry you into my happiness. Go home, live better, and when I am married, you will come, and you will give me away. and we will neither of us speak of the blizzard again." And Walter Braley broke where he stood, this hard grey man, and wept into his daughter's hands. And behind them, in the doorway, the Duke of Ravenscar bowed his head, because he had learned in that moment from a merchant's daughter the thing that 3 years of grief had never taught him, that forgiveness is not a gift you give to the one who wronged you. It is the door you walk through to get out of the cold. They were married at the little grey church in Malcolm on a morning in the early spring, with the snow gone to green and the first snowdrops out along the churchyard wall. And it was not the wedding the Tun would have chosen for a Duke of Ravenscar. No London crush, no royal guest. Only the village and the household, and a father with wet eyes who gave his daughter's hand into the Duke's with a care that looked very much like penance. Society, of course, talked. Society always talks. There were those in 3 counties who said the Duke of Ravenscar had gone mad in his grief and married a bankrupt's cast-off, and there were fewer of them than Rosamond had feared, and fewer still after they were received at last at a great house in the autumn, and the whole room watched the granite Duke turn his head to find his wife across the crowd, the way a compass finds north, and watched a duchess who wore her merchant blood without apology and her happiness without shame, and one by one the hostesses of 3 counties decided that they had always known there was more to Ravenscar than his sorrow, and the story changed in the telling until it became a romance, which, Rosamond supposed, laughing about it with Gideon by their own fire, it had been all along. The kitchen garden bloomed that summer as it had not bloomed in years. She did not have it changed. She had it kept, the small stone tended, the roses cut back and coaxed, and she walked there often with her hand through her husband's arm, past the place where his first family lay, and it was not a sorrow to her, because he had told her, standing there one gold evening, that he had spent 3 years believing his heart could hold only the dead, and that she had taught him it was large enough for both, that loving her did not unbuild the small grave, but planted something living beside it. And when, the second spring, she carried their own child high and careful through those same garden paths, he walked so close beside her, one hand always half lifted at her elbow, as though the very ground might betray her, that she teased him for it, and he did not deny it, and only said low that he had been made to bury what he loved once and would not be made to again, and that he would walk beside her over every inch of ground for the rest of their lives, if that was the price of it. And it was not a price, he said. It was the whole of the reward. Years later, when their eldest was old enough to ask the question children ask, "How did you and Papa meet?" Rosamond would tell it by the fire on winter nights, while the snow came down soft and harmless beyond the warm, bright glass, and she would tell it true. She would say that a girl was thrown out into a blizzard on the cruelest night of a hard winter, and that she walked into the white believing herself unloved and unwanted by every soul alive, and that a sad man who believed exactly the same of himself went out into the same storm because he could not bear his empty house, and that the two of them, each certain their heart was frozen shut forever, found each other at the foot of an old stone wall in the dark, and the child would ask every time, "But weren't you afraid, out in all that snow?" And Rosamond would look across the hearth at the grey-templed man, who still turned toward her as a compass finds north, at the bare hand that lay open on the arm of his chair waiting always for hers to fill it, and she would say, "No, my love, I was only afraid before. The cold was where the fear ended. The cold was where he found me. And I wonder, as you sit wherever you are with this story warming the dark around you, whether you have ever believed, as Rosamond believed on that terrible step, that a door had closed on you for the last time, and there was nothing but the storm beyond it. If you have, then perhaps you know what she came to know, that the coldest night of a life is sometimes only the threshold of its warmest chapter, and that the thing we are most certain we can never forgive is often the very door we must walk through to be free. If Rosamond's story warmed you tonight, tell me down in the comments about the night your own storm turned, or the forgiveness that set you free, or simply whether you would have opened that library door as she did, or fled to your room and let the fire go cold. I read every one, and if you long for another tale of a guarded heart and the woman who thaws it, stay with me, subscribe, and light the next candle with me. For there is always another storm, and always, always someone walking out into it to find you.